fundamentally changes the relationship between the citizenry and their own government. And more specifically, it does that by creating a climate of fear that radically alters the behavior and the sense of possibility that people in a certain society have. And I just want to tell a little personal anecdote about when that really became crystallized for me and how that kind of moved beyond the realm of the abstract into the very concrete. I have spent a lot of time over the past couple of years writing about WikiLeaks. And I write almost always in defense of that group and the whistleblowing and sort of explosions in the wall of secrecy behind which governments operate that they've been able to effectuate. And I remember the first time that I wrote about WikiLeaks was in January of 2010. And this was before very many people had heard about WikiLeaks. I hadn't heard about them at all. It was before they really did any of their news-making releases. It was before even they posted the video of the helicopters in Baghdad shooting Reuters journalists and unarmed civilians. It was before they really had done much in the way of big news making at all, at least in the United States. And the way that I had learned about WikiLeaks was that there was a top secret report prepared by the Pentagon in 2008. And this top secret report decreed WikiLeaks to be an enemy of the state. And it talked about ways that the Pentagon wanted to go about destroying WikiLeaks and undermining their efficacy. It talked about fabricating documents and submitting them so that once WikiLeaks published them, they would publish false documents and their credibility would be destroyed. It talked about uncovering the identity of their sources so that nobody would feel safe leaking anymore to WikiLeaks. It was a very elaborate plan prepared by the Pentagon as to how they would destroy this enemy of the state, and it was marked top secret. Ironically, this report got leaked to WikiLeaks, which published it on its website, the report in full, the top secret report. And the New York Times had a very brief article about it, and it talked about how the Pentagon had declared this group that no one had really heard of before to be an enemy of the state. And I remember at the time, I didn't know anything about WikiLeaks, but I remember reading that report and the New York Times account of it and thinking that any organization that has been declared an enemy of the state by the Pentagon and that the Pentagon is working to destroy is one that needs a lot more attention and probably a lot of support. And so I went and looked at the history of WikiLeaks, and I had found that they had done some incredibly impressive work on transparency. They had exposed corporate wrongdoing in West Africa. They had exposed government deceit in parts of Australia and in Northern Europe. The model and the template that they had created was a very exciting one because it was allowing government transparency in a way that establishment newspapers, for all sorts of reasons, were incapable of. And because I view pervasive government secrecy as the linchpin of all the abuses that we've been talking about, and transparency and sunlight as the ultimate weapon against them, I was very enthused by the promise of this organization. And I wrote a long article highlighting their successes and the promise that I thought they held, and I interviewed Julian Assange, and I published the interview with this article I wrote. And at the end of the piece that I wrote, I encouraged people who were also supportive of their work to donate money to the organization because they were facing budgetary constraints that were preventing them from processing a lot of the leaks that they were sitting on, including the ones that ultimately made such news. And I included some links to their PayPal account and some information about how to wire money to their account as well. And this is something I periodically do. I encourage readers to donate money to organizations or causes that I think are constructive. And in response to my writing that, I had hundreds of people, definitely dozens, probably hundreds, in all different venues, in the comment section to the article I had written, by email, at events like this, come up to me and basically say the same thing, which is something along the following lines. They would say, look, I agree with you about the great promise that WikiLeaks holds. You've convinced me that this is an organization that merits a lot of support. But I'm actually afraid that if I donate money to them digitally, through PayPal or wiring money to their bank account, that I'm actually going to end up on some government list somewhere. Or worse, that I, at some point, if WikiLeaks in the future is declared by the US government to be a terrorist organization, I could actually be prosecuted for materially supporting a terrorist group. And these are not people prone to paranoia or conspiracy. These were very well-grounded, rational, reasoned people who were expressing to me this fear that I hadn't previously considered, but given how many people had been expressing it, these were American citizens largely, really amazed me. And it was actually pretty jarring and eye-opening. And the reason is that WikiLeaks is an organization that had never been, in fact they have never been to this day, charged with, let alone convicted of, any crime of any kind. Nor could they be, since they're engaged in the art of pure journalism, what media outlets around the world do, which is receive government secrets from people who are in government and then publish those secrets to inform citizens about what governments and corporate factions are doing. And yet here were countless people petrified of asserting their most basic First Amendment rights of free speech and free assembly and free petition, which is what donating money to a political organization whose cause you support is. They were petrified of exercising their own constitutional rights. They didn't need to be threatened with police invasions of their home or arrest if they did it. They didn't need a law to abolish free speech. The climate of fear that has been created was sufficient to get them on their own to voluntarily relinquish the exercise of their own rights. And you can offer all the rights in the world on a piece of paper or a piece of parchment that you want, but if you put the citizenry into a position of fear about exercising those rights become worthless. And the reason they were afraid of exercising those rights is because they watched their own government over the past decade demonstrate repeatedly that they are willing to cross not some lines that we've imposed on how they can exercise their power, but every line, without any consequence and without any recrimination. And there's just one other personal anecdote that I want to share to just bolster that point and to underscore and highlight what I mean. In addition to WikiLeaks, I also spent a lot of time, and still spend a lot of time, writing about the case of Bradley Manning, the Army private who is accused of being the principal leaker to WikiLeaks of those newsworthy leaks. And in December of 2000, or in June of 2010, in December of 2010, I wrote an article detailing the ways in which he was being confined in extremely oppressive and inhumane conditions. Ones that the UN just recently, the top torture investigator at the UN last month concluded was both inhumane and cruel. That he was subjected to extreme, protracted, solitary confinement, was harassed in all these sadistic ways, ones that the US government itself has characterized as torture when done by other countries, that studies show result in possibly permanent, psychologically crippling afflictions. And one of the things that was so baffling to me about what was being done, and a lot of people asked me this question as well, which is why would the Obama administration want to subject him to this level of mistreatment? It actually seems counterproductive. Because for one thing, it makes prosecution more difficult, because if you drive a prisoner into insanity through the treatment to which you subject him, you cannot convict him. It also means that any statements that he makes while in custody that are incriminating can be subject to challenge, that he only made them because he was being coerced by the conditions. It also created sympathy for him and turned him into a martyr among people who were otherwise unsympathetic to those leaks. In fact, President Obama's State Department spokesman, P.J. Crowley, denounced the treatment as stupid and counterproductive and then was forced to resign. It really elevated the controversy around Bradley Manning, created lots of sympathy for him, so it was hard to figure out why they'd want to do it. It seemed counterproductive, contrary to their own interests. And after spending some time being asked this a lot, and actually asking myself it a lot, why would they want to do this, the thing that I realized is that the reason that Bradley Manning was put into those conditions and treated with such cruelty and inhumane barbarism is the same reason that the US government abducted hundreds of people and shipped them thousands of miles away to a Caribbean island and dressed them in orange jumpsuits and shackles and showed the world that. It's the same reason that the US government bombs people at will and blows up huge numbers of families and civilians and innocent people all the time, knowing that it's going to do that, and yet continues to do it. It's a way of expressing to the world, especially to anybody who might challenge US government power and policy and authority, that if you want to challenge what we're doing, if you are a would-be whistleblower who discovers things that we've done corruptly in secret and wants to expose it to the world, think about it twice and look at what we've done to Bradley Manning without any limit. Or if you're somebody who wants to resist US government invasions or occupations. Look at what we've done to Guantanamo prisoners or to people around the world that we've abducted and detained and rendered for torture, and we've done all of this without consequence because there are no lines that we won't cross and that we can't cross at will. It's a way of conveying to the population that you should be in a posture of fear when it comes to thinking about challenging what we're doing. That's the motive for it, it's the effect of it, and the ultimate outcome.